Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this space. That countdown clock made this very exciting, made me a little bit more nervous, I think, but I'm very happy that all of you are here. I wish that I could see your faces, but of course, this is just the time we're in. I love the theme of this year's conference of servant leadership. I am very, very excited to be here. I feel very honored and also just very, very happy to turn my focus for the day to our tribe and our people. And yeah, so let's just dive right in. So just a quick welcome. Again, thank you for being here. This is an important theme, like I already named, servant leadership in today's age. It says so much to me that so many people from all over the country registered to be a part of this conference. It says to me that you're trying to keep moving forward and keep being of service to our people. So thank you all so much for being here. So before I dove into our content for today, I wanted to share a little bit about who I am and why I'm here. My name is Chelsie Wilson. I live and work in Oklahoma City with my husband and our two children. You may recognize my dad from the cultural opening this morning. I think he may be tuning in now. If you are, hi, Dad. You'll also see my mom and my grandma at her 90th birthday. Although it's kind of funny, they were both born on January 7th, so they're birthday buddies. My son Wyatt is here on this slide, and my sisters and my aunt Starla, and my daughter, who my dad is holding there in the top right corner, is actually turning 1 today. Today is her first birthday, so we're really excited about that. So that's a little bit about who I am. Now I'd love to tell you a little bit about what I do. I am the Chief of Staff at Teach for America, Oklahoma City. What we do is we find, develop, and support exceptional and diverse leaders so that they can transform education and expand opportunities for children starting in the classroom. Our 10-year goal is to double the number of students in our community in Oklahoma City to reach key educational milestones, indicating that they're on a path to economic mobility and a future filled with possibility. So as Chief of Staff, I leverage power on our team and across our community to maximize our impact. And I train our teachers in Oklahoma City on leadership, on professional development, and also on diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And before I came on staff at Teach for America, I worked in Washington, D.C. for about 4.5 years on federal Indian policy and in American Indian business. And before that, I actually worked for our tribe, for the Cherokee Nation, back in 2012 in the government relations department. I have really great memories of the work that we did together back in that time. It seems like forever ago. So yeah, let's just dive right in. So we're going to spend some time today looking together at some data, reflecting on how we've experienced this pandemic and looking at a framework for how to process this whole experience of COVID-19 with your community organizations. And you may be asking yourself why, and I think that is kind of the whole crux of our time together today. It's very crucial to be able to understand our experience of COVID-19 and to be able to locate it within our entire tribal experience, because it actually does connect us to one another. And it grounds our experience into a collective and helps us make meaning together so that we can heal and continue to move forward and keep our culture and our community going. The only thing you might need for this session is for those of us who like processing with good old-fashioned pen and paper, you might want to grab a pen. I also believe there is a way to type notes through the conference app. So if you are a more computer-minded processor, feel free to take notes in the app. And before we get started, I did want to just take 1 minute to kind of pause. There's a picture of Karen Ketcher here in this slide. She was one of the first and most shocking losses that our tribe faced from COVID-19. My friend Taryn, she was in my wedding. That's her grandma. And whatever you believe, whatever you practice, I just wanted to take a moment and have us breathe deeply, remember those we've lost, send good medicine to their family, pray if you're a believer in prayer. And yeah, so we'll just take 1 minute to kind of pause. All right, thank you so much for pausing with me. Another quick note about some of the content that you're going to see today. We're going to work with a diversity, equity, inclusion framework that was designed by my colleague, Alexa Broderick. So thank you to her. Okay. So really quick, I'd love for us to type into the chat one positive change that you've made or experienced in your life during this season of COVID-19, of quarantining, the racial strife that's going on. Maybe you're taking your child through distance learning or your grandchild. So if you want to just enter into the chat one positive change you've made or experienced, I'd love to see how your lives have changed in positive ways. I see that note from Diana that she knew Karen personally. She really was. She was an amazing lady. It was a big loss. So I'm not seeing a ton in the chat. I will share with you all that I have been walking a lot more in times of working from home and virtual work. So that's been a healthy change for me. Okay, I see more outdoor activities. That's great. All right. So yeah, I just wanted us to start on a positive note, and then we're gonna go ahead and just dig right in on the objectives. So we are going to spend our time together looking at some data, reflecting on how we've experienced this pandemic, and looking at a framework for how to process this with our community organizations. And again, the question of why is understandable. The reason why it's important to do this is because understanding our experience of COVID-19, being able to locate it within our entire tribal experience connects us to one another. It grounds our experience as a collective, and those connections to one another are more important now than ever. I mean, you have to kind of just pause and realize, we're connecting with one another virtually almost all the time now, and it just isn't the same as being together and being in person and being able to hug and see one another. And after a while, that takes a toll on our connections to one another. So processing this, taking some time, having some tools to look at that'll help us make sense of this crazy experience is going to be helpful for us in order to be able to heal and continue moving forward to keep our culture and our community going. So here is how we're going to spend our time in this session. We're going to check in. We're going to go over the diversity, equity, and inclusive implications of COVID-19 and look at some data on people of color, our Black and Brown brothers and sisters, but also look at some data that's specifically pertinent to us as American Indian people. We're gonna then move into looking at the framework that my colleague Alexa came up with for processing the diversity, equity, and inclusive aspects of COVID-19 and how it's hitting people of color just differently than it is the larger society. And then we're going to close out with some closing reflections and answer any questions that you might have. So now we're going to just check in with ourselves. If we were in person, I would want to split us up into small groups so that we could talk with our colleagues and our friends that are also at this conference. But since we're doing this virtually, I'm going to ask you to get out your pen and paper or hop into the notes section of the conference app, and just feel free to also share out, even in the chat, just how are you feeling these days? You know, for a lot of us, I think we were really running on like adrenaline for a few months. Maybe that's starting to wear off. Yeah, so just take a minute and answer these questions either by typing or on pen and paper. How are you feeling? I'd also love for you to reflect and process on the identities that you felt most close to since COVID-19 began. And what I mean by that, you know, for me, I think I really have been feeling closer to my Native American identity. Just seeing headlines and seeing news, local news here in Oklahoma, national news, like with the Navajo Nation, that this coronavirus, COVID-19, is actually way more risky for people like us. I've also felt really close to my identity as a mother, having 2 young children. It's been really, really hard adjusting to life that is a much smaller world than what I was used to, you know, last year. And then the third thing I'd love for you to reflect on is how has COVID-19 impacted you personally and professionally? And how do you think that your identities, the identities that came up for you for question 2, have influenced the way you're experiencing this pandemic? So a lot of us are, if we're working full-time, we're working from home. That has personal and professional impacts. You know, for me, by the end of a work week, I'm just feeling stir crazy. I'm wanting to go somewhere, but the number of places that are safe to go is way, way smaller than it used to be. You know, you kind of had to assess risk a lot in your personal and professional life. Even like going to check the mail at my office. I was going to go to our office and do some organizing, but we just had a COVID-19 exposure in our office. So, you know, the small day-to-day decisions that we're making, either in our professional or personal lives, are just different than they were back in February. And yeah, how do you think your identity have influenced the way you're experiencing COVID-19? I know I have a ton of empathy for people on my team that are Asian American or Pacific Islander, especially in March and April. Here in Oklahoma City, some of my colleagues were experiencing a lot of racism, a lot of like blatant, you know, discrimination from a lot of different, like at the grocery store, you know, people were just afraid. So I know that I say that mainly to say that your identity can influence the way that you're experiencing this pandemic. Yes. Thanks, Steve. I see you watching and caring for our people. And Diana, you're a hugger. It is a really, really hard habit to break. It feels very strange. So another note, as people are kind of wrapping up their reflections, I invite you, I'm pretty sure this presentation will be made available to everyone, but I invite you to take these questions and this method of checking in back with you to your community organization or a team that you work with regularly, because our identities as Cherokee people directly impact how we process and understand this challenging time that we find ourselves in. And it's really important to check in with your people, and whether or not that's in a community organization context, even in your work teams, in your work life, or with your family. I am kind of mad at myself that I haven't checked in with my family in a while. All the, once the newness wore off and we all just got used to this, I kind of stopped asking people, like, how are you and how are you doing with the pandemic? I love that, Savannah. Limited contact, it can be really, really draining and really hard, especially when you're going through big life changes and you want your family to be a part of that. It's weird. Okay, I'm gonna keep moving us on, and we're gonna go into some of the diversity, equity, and inclusion implications of COVID-19. So I would cold call on, in a normal world, I would cold call on somebody to read this aloud for us, because I bet you're tired of hearing my voice, but I'm gonna go ahead and read this. I can't take credit for writing it. It's from our foundations at Teach for America. But unequal access to opportunity along lines of race, class, and other aspects of identity has deep roots in American history, and institutional racism and contribute to inequitable access to opportunity in our country today. Therefore, understanding race, class, and the intersectional nature of oppression along these and other lines is critical to eliminating inequity and creating a system in which all people can flourish. So I say that because I think it's important to hone in on why this pandemic is hitting us hard, us harder than other communities. So let's just dive right in and talk about what's at play here, and how is this showing up, and why is this impacting us as American Indians different than it impacts the rest of society. So let's talk a little bit about institutional racism. I want us to all kind of be working from the same definition just for the purposes of processing this data together. I'll let you read this definition for yourself, but basically what we're talking about here is ways that society mutually reinforces inequitable systems. So it's basically how racism can get built into the confluence of policies and practices that are entrenched in systems that touch our lives in really direct ways. And how do we solve it? So this is an important question to ask, because we advance equity when we acknowledge and account for past and current inequities. And when those who are most impacted are meaningfully involved in the creation and implementation of policies and practices that impact their lives. This is super important for us as Indian people, as Native American people. We are the most governed group of people in the United States. Federal laws touch our lives in this ways, and all of us on this call know that. We're highly legislated as people. And even though some exciting things have happened recently that are giving us back a lot of our sovereignty and a lot of our inherent rights, it's still just a fact that we are highly regulated, highly legislated as a tribe, and some of the policies that regulate us and that legislate us are founded in institutional racism. So how does this apply to COVID-19? These are pretty much the main ways that I see this applying to COVID-19. So it's not unlike something like climate change. COVID-19 has been a trauma multiplier for people who are already marginalized, who are already underserved by the healthcare system, because of the racism that we just talked about. we are going to be overrepresented, and people that are most vulnerable are going to be hit hardest by something like this COVID-19 pandemic. It compounds and amplifies existing inequities in ways that it's just impossible not to acknowledge. So that's how it applies to COVID-19. Now I'm going to take us into some of the data between racial inequity and health outcomes. And it really is getting harder and harder for the larger public and American society to ignore. I know we are very lucky, those of us in the tribal jurisdiction, to have access to really amazing, incredible healthcare. And I think our leaders deserve a lot of credit for making that available to us. For those of us who live outside the Cherokee Nation official jurisdiction and rely on our employers or on the state for health insurance, this is going to be, a real barrier for us in order to access care and to be listened to by our healthcare providers. I also think it's super important to talk about how people of color, especially our people, experiencing chronic stress and historical trauma in ways that, just average American society doesn't. And that can have huge ramifications on your health, but also on your ability to fight off a disease like COVID-19. Okay, so here's some data that I wanted to just pull out and have us kind of sit with and process through together. As I mentioned before, historical trauma and persisting inequities have contributed to the disparity that we can see here on this slide. 34%. I mean, I'm just going to let that sink in because it's important. It's important for us to know, and it's important for us to acknowledge together that that overall COVID-19 incidence among our community is going to be 3.5 times that of white people. This is a pretty staggering statistic, and I thought that it was important that we acknowledge that together. And I know a lot of us have actually lived through this and have seen this statistic play out in your life, in your communities, in your towns, with people you go to church with. So I don't mean to preach to the choir, but I do think that it's important for us to process through it together as a people. So these are just some other quick bullet points that kind of help us drive home the connection between racial inequity and COVID-19. Tribal communities are being infected in high numbers in urban areas, but also in rural areas like the Navajo Nation and communities right here in Oklahoma. And vulnerable groups are definitely the most at risk. Another point of view that I wanted to bring in here, just to honor our other Black and Brown brothers and sisters. It was something that as a team we were, as a team at Teach for America, we were really grappling with how do we show up for our Asian American and Pacific Islander colleagues and friends. They were not okay for a very long time. And I think if you have anyone in your life who is Asian American Pacific Islander, I highly encourage you to check in on those people and make sure that they're doing okay, because what they experienced at the grocery store or at the gas station in the early months of this pandemic, it's just wrong, and it's going to have an impact on them as well. So why is this the case? Why is it affecting African Americans, American Indians, and communities of color? Again, there's just a major connection to an increased propensity to chronic diseases and and the connection is from socioeconomic inequity and health inequity. So now we're going to move into, after having gone through that data and seeing those numbers and thinking about people in our community, people who might not be in our community, I wanted to invite you to, again, kind of go back to your reflections. If you like writing notes on paper and pencil, I invite you to do that. If you want to take notes in the app, please do that as well. But just take some time and reflect. What are your reactions to this data? How close do you feel to it? Have you experienced it firsthand, or is it very different from or distant from your own experience? What are the implications of your identity and your proximity to COVID-19? And what must we as individuals and must we as a tribe make to reconcile this data? So I'm going to give us time just to jot down how we're processing this information. And as I give people time, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. All right. Thank you all for that. I hope that you were able to reflect and process on your own experiences. And very, very excited to hear if any of this has unlocked any ideas for how we can work together as a collective, as a tribe, to reconcile this data and continue to process and heal. So now we're going to move into the processing and strategy framework. Again, I want to give a big shout out to my colleague Alexa, who came up with this framework. I think that it's super helpful. One thing I'd also like to note before we dive in is that this processing and strategy framework is really, really great to use at an organizational level whenever anything happens that might be related to COVID-19 and it's affecting somebody in your team or in your organization. It's just a way to make meaning of it and understand it together. But I also want to kind of call out, we have great tribal leadership at Cherokee Nation. Unfortunately, we don't see that kind of leadership at all layers of our government. And so I think that these questions that are within this framework are really valuable to be asking of all the people that are running for office or are in local office or in statewide offices. These are questions that leaders at every single layer need to be asking themselves. So this is the processing and strategy framework that starts with awareness of self, moves into examination of power, acknowledging and accounting for past and current inequities, elevating, centering, and being led by those who are marginalized and most impacted by the consequences of COVID-19, and then continuously making adjustments. So this is a high-level view of the framework. So let's move directly into awareness of self. And I'm going to invite everybody to jot in the answers to these questions in the chat if you want to share with the whole group how you're kind of approaching the framework, since this is your first introduction to it. So awareness of self, I think that I listed some questions that you could ask yourself as a leader, as a community leader, as a teammate, as a person on a team. What does diversity, equity, inclusion, why does it matter to you? How does your identity, your position, or inform your unique approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion work? And then what sorts of behaviors would that require? What kind of questions do you ask yourselves? And what sorts of decisions do you challenge? I'd be very interested to hear about what kind of questions community leaders are asking themselves these days and how to provide services and opportunities to connect for your community in this virtual time. But these are some questions that you might ask yourself in order to bring awareness to where your community is, where your team is, in approaching work that involves the equity and inclusion. So then we move over to examination of power. As new programs, new projects, new policies are being developed in your sphere and in your work, and decisions are being, it's important to examine who is setting the parameters, who do the parameters serve, are all groups affected by this policy at the decision-making table? And is there evidence of understanding how the policy and practice and the decision will affect each group within the wider community group? So I think for the context of a cultural community organization, I think this is a good part of the framework to think about the multiple groups with different needs that you might be serving. Our elders have different needs than our youth do. Our working parents have different needs than than our elders. So I think this just helps us be very mindful about um, who is at the table and what are the things that we're doing. Maybe we're coming up with a new program, or maybe we're coming up with a new virtual event to offer connection to people. I think it just helps us put our people at the center and think about who is going to be impacted by the way that we design our programs, our projects, and our policies. So that's examination of power. And now we move into accounting and acknowledging for past and current inequities. I think that this is more for our leaders at higher levels, but also I think you could apply this to your role. If I'm thinking about myself and the work that I do at Teach for America, I'm thinking about it's my responsibility to create our handbook, our employee handbook, and whenever it came time to think about possibly reopening the office, one of the ways I acknowledged and accounted for past and current inequities is I talked to our staff of color, and I included myself in that as an Indigenous woman, as like being higher risk just based on those current and past inequities that contributed to some of the data that we already looked at, to offer special accommodations, and to account for some of those things before requiring them to come into the office. So that's just one example that I thought I'd throw out there. Although this is the part of the framework that I think is particularly helpful in supplying questions that I would love to hear. Like, I would love to hear our state governor's answers to some of these questions. So please feel free to to snag those questions and ask them of the people who are leading us and who are responsible for our state and our community. And then we get to elevating, centering, and being led by marginalized voices. So again, looking back at the data and the narratives around COVID-19 that center the most vulnerable individuals in our community, what can we do as leaders in our tribe and our tribal communities all over the country? What can we do to put people who are the most impacted by this pandemic at the center of what we do? And if anybody has an answer to that question that you want to put in the chat, I'd love to hear how you all are thinking about caring for our people that are most vulnerable in this time. I think I kind of mentioned how I've been approaching that in my role. And a lot of this requires some creative thinking, to be honest, because caring for the incredibly vulnerable groups in our community, like the elderly and like the young, it requires some creativity and some thought. I know there are a lot of cool ideas about car parades that I've seen, especially for elders and for school children. But yeah, that's just a question to think about for that part of the framework. Okay, and then we get to continually making adjustments. So this is where additional learning comes in. How do we deepen our understanding of the root causes at play for why things are the way that they are? Building your capacity to disrupt these inequitable outcomes. Is there a plan in place to ensure that all of that learning is going to happen? Is there a plan in place to evaluate how we're doing at impacting our own behaviors? So that is continuously making adjustments. And I really do love that. And I think I'm leading a session later this afternoon about values-based leadership. I think I've learned so much in my current role about leading with values, and learning continuously is one of my favorite core values that we guide our work around at Teach for America. But yes, continuously making improvements is the last portion of this framework. And yes, I would love to give everyone a friendly reminder to submit your questions through the chat or through the Q&A function, whichever you feel most comfortable with, if any questions are coming up for you, or if you have any feedback you'd like to share. And then the last slide that I have is just a note of encouragement to discuss this with your community. I'd love to hear if there are any aspects of this framework you feel really excited to take back to your communities or to your place of work. Are there aspects of the framework that you're already employing on a pretty regular basis? I would love to hear that. I'd also love to understand where there might be some pain points or some hot spots. I think even just in talking about it with all of you, I'm realizing that putting vulnerable and marginalized voices at the center, it requires some creative thinking because of the constraints of the pandemic. So I'd love to hear if there were any parts of the framework that somebody thought, oh, that'd be kind of difficult for me in my context. And then would also love to hear if anyone feels moved to learn more or start doing or stop doing something in order to mobilize thoughtful approaches around COVID-19 that center on equity and on our people's collective experience when it comes to COVID-19. Because as I've said a couple of times, it's just hitting American Indian communities harder and differently than other like wider communities. So I'll just say again that I think it's so crucial to understand our experience of COVID-19 and to be able to locate it within our entire tribal experience, because I really do believe it connects us to one another and it grounds our experience into a collective experience and helps us make meaning together so that we can heal and continue moving forward. A big part of servant leadership is being of service to one another. And I do think that means checking in, looking at how we as a people are being confronted by this pandemic and noticing together that it's hitting our communities a little bit harder than others and differently. And more than anything, I believe that our people, the Cherokee people, deserve care. And I'm very grateful to all the leadership that I've seen from the tribal government. And I think that they're leading by example. And I'm very hopeful that our state and other states across the country can take a page out of their book. But because I think our leaders need to be asking themselves these questions too. It's really important. And with that, I'll kind of just pause and look at the chat, see if there's anything going on there. Hi there, Jane McCree. Sorry, I wish I could have pronounced that better. I see your note that you came in late. I think that we've been recording this whole time, and I'm going to make this PowerPoint available to share with everyone. So hopefully you'll be able to, if not see the recording, yes, it looks like this is being recorded, and so you'll be able to access this session later. And I'm very happy that you came in, even if it was late. Looks like they will be open for several months. So that's good. Thanks, Savannah. Thank you. I'm very glad you found it informative. That makes me happy. A fun note, our moderator, Savannah, is my cousin. And I haven't gotten to see her in a really long time because of COVID. Tribe is like one big family. Thanks, Diana. I'm glad you found it informative. If there are no official questions, I'd love to just hear, are you all community leaders? Where's everybody from? Where is everyone tuning in from? Diana and Levon. Steve. Last night I was looking at okay, San Diego. All right. That's great. Oh, that's great. So I'm hopeful that you all can use this at your Cherokee community to think through. That's great. Okay, and Diana, Mid-County Community, Adair County. Great. San Diego. Diana, I hope everybody in Adair County is doing good. A lot of my family lives there. So I know you have a diverse community, people with different needs. So I hope that you found some helpful information from this. Great. All right, Steve. White Oak Grounds in White Oak, Oklahoma. An elder tuning in on Zoom. Way to go, Steve. I'm happy you're here. You know, I don't know if I've ever been to White Oak. Savannah, have you ever been to White Oak?
I have.
Okay.
We have, with the organization, that's a small town, but it's right when you get through like Big Cabin, and it's right outside of Bonita.
Okay. Now I can place it in my mind's eye.
Some good people out there.
Good people like Steve. Savannah, I don't, this is my last slide. I know we're ending just a little bit early, but should we just continue to kind of chat, or I don't want to hold people too long. Just hear my thoughts and musings.
Yeah, no, we can go. I mean, if you want to go ahead and we can, end it here. I want to encourage everybody to fill out the training evaluation at the end of this session. They do have to complete at least 4 in order to get some cool swag from CCO. So,
Swag.
yes.
All
So do
right.
not forget to fill out her evaluation, and you'll find that on her session. So when you get out of her session, it'll be kind of towards the bottom and it'll say training evaluation.
Great. Okay, well, thank you everyone for being here with me. Oh, it looks like Mary Shaw is from Hot Springs, Arkansas. Hey, Mary. Glad you're here. And yeah, I just really appreciated being in community with one another. I hope that you check in on your people after this, make sure everybody's doing good. And just such a privilege. And thank you very much for being here.